Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, welcome to the August 11th, 2014 meeting of the City of Fayetteville Planning Commission. Please take this opportunity to silence or turn off your cell phones. Mr. Fulcher, would you please call the roll?
Monchel? Here. Cook? Here. Winston?
Here.
Bunch?
Here.
Noble? Selby? Autry?
Here.
Hoskins?
Here.
Chester?
Here.
Okay. First item of business is the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from the July 28, 2014 Planning Commission meeting and concurrent plat for 4124 East Mission Boulevard. Is there any member of the commission like to pull any of these items? Motion, please.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Chester.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda by Commissioner Chester and a second by Commissioner Weston. Mr. Fulcher. I'm going to get this right.
I know. Good change up. Monchel?
Yes.
Cook? Yes. Winston?
Yes.
Bunch?
Yes.
Autry?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Chester?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. We have no old business for that, so we're going to move on to the next item. First item of new business is lot split for submitted by the city staff, property located at Lot 14 Industrial Park West. The property is zoned I-2 General Industrial and contains one tract totaling approximately 37.06 acres. The request is to split the property into two tracts containing 24 and 13.06 acres each, and for a variance to create a lot without frontage on a public sewer line. Mr. Fulcher.
Yeah, a little confusing to have a lot split on the agenda in front of the Planning Commission. These are typically approved at the technical plat review meeting. Administratively by staff, it's essentially to create a lot, you just have to meet the zoning requirements. There are no minimum requirements from a lot size or lot frontage that are applicable here that we need to discuss. It's that when you create a tract, you're supposed to have legal access to the tract, access to a public water line and to a public sewer line. In this case, the City of Fayetteville is selling 24 acres of a 37-acre parcel to Pacific Vet Group down at the south end of Industrial Park West, which is part of the former industrial park known as Commerce District. And the back portion of the property, the southeast portion of the property, is mostly floodplain. There's also a stream running through that area. The group purchasing the property from the City of Fayetteville does not want to acquire that additional 13 acres because it is very restricted. You might be able to do a small amount of development, but for the most part it's floodplain and streamside protection zones. And so we have offered to sell them the remaining 24 acres, and the city would maintain ownership of that 13 acres. The issue is that we cut ourselves off from a public water line. So the alternative is to extend a public water line 600 feet back to a tract that has extremely limited development potential that will be retained by the City of Fayetteville, or to request a variance for that specific requirement. We've done this a few times on commercial properties. That is, the Planning Commission has seen a variance from a public water line or public sewer line access on commercial properties. We rarely ever see it on residential. We don't like to see that occur for residential properties. In this case, it's just a matter of should we expend a great deal of money to extend a water line to a property that's likely never going to be developed or has very limited development potential. That seems to make sense to grant a variance in this case, so we're recommending approval of the variance with that one finding by the Planning Commission. Thank you.
And of course, the other reason that the city wanted to maintain ownership of that is also to protect the land, which is wetlands and streamside protection area. So we felt like at this point we were the best custodians of that, and we certainly didn't need to have any development on the property at this point in time.
Okay. Well, since I guess the city's the applicant, we've already heard from the applicant, haven't we? So is there any member of the public who'd like to speak to this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Chester.
this is straightforward to me, and I agree with staff. I'm going to move that we approve LSP 14-4804 with staff's one recommendation of approval.
Second.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on this? Yeah. One question, Mr. Fulcher. I assume the city is retaining some type of access easement back to the property?
That's correct. That's a good question. Access, there's a dedicated right-of-way, platted right-of-way that gives us access from Armstrong to our property. We also own 2 adjacent tracks that give us access back to Industrial Drive, so we will maintain access to the
So
property.
we can get back there to maintain it and take care of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you, okay? All
There's
right.
some possibility in the future that the people that are buying the other land from us will in fact want to acquire this sometime in the future, and they of course have access to it too. We'll look at that in the future. It's nothing to be decided right now.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, we have a motion to approve by Commissioner Chesser and a second by Commissioner Autry. Mr. Fulcher?
Yes, sir. Honchul?
Yes.
Cook?
Yes.
Winston?
Yes.
Bunt?
Yes.
Autry? Yes. Hoskins?
Yes.
Chesser?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is large-scale development 14-4791, submitted by Moore Shipley Engineers for property located at 3500 West Black Forest Drive. The property is zoned RPZD Residential Plan Zoning District and contains approximately 1.19 acres. The request is for the construction of a 6,176 square foot building and associated parking. And Mr. Fulcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is another lot of the Forest Hills development on Weddington Drive, one of the outlots there in front of the neighborhood market property. The applicant has 1.2 acres, a request of 6,100 square foot building for proposed Starbucks and dental office or some sort of office use on the adjacent tenant space. Street improvements in this area were pretty much all completed with the original project. As each of these outlots developed, the interior street improvements really are just sidewalks around the property, street trees, just minor improvements directly adjacent to the site. All the major public improvements were completed, including detention, regional detention proposals for the majority of the properties in the subdivision. Really, the big discussion with this property, from prior to technical plat all the way through subdivision committee, has been with tree preservation. It's always been a little bit of a challenge on these lots because of the few number of trees and their location on these outlots. The applicant has done a really good job working with our urban forestry division to work around 2 substantial trees in the middle of the site. I believe it's a 30-inch red oak and an 18-inch honey locust that are just about right in the middle of this property. They've shifted their building footprint around, they've moved their drive-through lane around, and done a really good job to work around these 2 trees. That was one of the items that we had them slightly modify the drive-through and the location of a transformer. At subdivision committee, they made all the changes requested by staff as discussed at that meeting. Urban Foresters recommended approval of their tree preservation plan. We're recommending approval of the project at this time. There's 2 findings by the Planning Commission. One is of architectural design standards. We've included updated regulations for Forest Hills. This project fully meets those requirements. And then there's a variance of green space on the west property line. That's due to the fact that we asked them to move the drive-through lane to the west property line to, again, create some more space underneath the canopy of the 2 trees that are being preserved. And then there's a small corner along Weddington where the state has acquired additional right-of-way, approximately 15 feet, I believe, more than what we even require, which is 43 feet. They're up in the 56-foot range. And so it's just a little notch up there where the state's acquired additional right-of-way. Typically in those situations, we try to work with the applicant on a variance situation because of the excessive right-of-way and the fact that there's a lot of green space still in front of the building, just part of this within the state ownership. Those are findings 1 and 2. Standard and minor conditions of approval beyond that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the applicant present? Who else heard? Give us your name and anything that you might want to add.
Larry Grelly with Morrison Shipley Engineers. Just here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay.
And let you know that we do agree with the conditions of approval.
Great, thank you, sir. Is there any member of the public who'd like to step up and speak about this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioners.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner West.
I was in the subdivision committee, well, with you, I guess.
Oh, that's right.
And so I think we were happy with the project and the changes that they're planning on making. They've made all those changes. And we had no issues with architectural design standards, so I'll move to approve large-scale development 14-4791 for Starbucks Center, finding in favor of the determination regarding architectural design standards, and number 2, finding in favor of the request for a variance from green space issues and the other 15 conditions of approval.
Okay. All right. We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Winston and a second by Commissioner Cook. Commissioner Cook. Mr. Fulcher.
Sir. Honchul?
Yes.
Cook?
Yes.
Winston?
Yes.
Bunch?
Yes.
Autry?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Jesser?
Yes.
Motion carries.
That was painless, huh? Next item on the agenda is conditional use permit 14-4699, submitted by Ecological Design Group for property located at East Mission Boulevard. The property is zoned NC, Neighborhood Conservation, CS, Community Services, and RSF4, residential, single-family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 15.94 acres. The request is for a conditional use permit to create 7 tandem lots and 6 townhouse lots, 2 and 3 family dwellings within the development. And Mr. Garner doesn't seem to be here, so it's your turn again.
Yes, sir. And if you don't mind, the conditional use and the preliminary plat I'll kind of tie together in the presentation, and the commission can discuss those individually and vote on them individually. To kind of give it the overall overview, I'll jump over to the preliminary plat.
Saying they can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. To discuss the preliminary plat, since that's the kind of overview of the project, and then I'll touch on the points of the conditional use permit being requested. So the Ruskin Heights project, I think everyone is mostly familiar with. There on Mission Boulevard. It was started construction and actually completed a majority of the improvements to the site. Obviously, most people have probably driven up on the streets that were constructed. You can see those that aren't shaded are the streets that have been completed. They completed improvements to Mission Boulevard, sidewalks, road widening, turn lane installation. Really, we're close to the final plat for this project, and that's where the project stalled. It eventually expired, and this has kind of been sitting there at this point. New project team involved with this development, so they're bringing it through in 2 phases. The first phase is what they're proposing tonight, which in a nutshell is a 63-lot subdivision utilizing the existing infrastructure. Really at the top of the hill, in the white here, you can see all the lots that are being platted, and then this additional infrastructure, streets and alleys that will be proposed as part of this preliminary plat that they'll need to construct at this point. That's in the dark gray. You also remember a rezoning. A few years ago, the majority of this is neighborhood conservation, so it's a single-family zoning district. It just allows some smaller lots, though I believe their lot size is actually quite a bit larger than the neighborhood conservation zoning district minimum requirement. The bottom portion here is community services. There's really nothing being proposed in that area at this point. That would be part of phase 2. And then some portions out along Greenview or close to Greenview in this street extension that would be part of phase 2 as well. The portion of the conditional use that's being requested is for tandem lots. Just to remind everyone, a tandem lot is a lot without the required frontage on a public street. So for neighborhood conservation, they require 40 feet along a public street, but there are, I believe, 7 lots within this development that do not have the required frontage on a public street. That does not mean that they don't have public access to them. Some of those, such as lot 54, have access off of this alley. So all of these lots here along this street have public street frontage and are lots that meet that requirement. But 54 and 55, because they don't actually front onto that public street, are considered tandem lots, so they have the same exact access setup as the adjacent lots. Same here with 46 and 47. These are kind of laid out along a common walkway through the development. So this is kind of a unique setup for those interior lots. Those are a few of the tandem lots. This lot 23 here in the corner, it has public street frontage, just not quite enough public street frontage. Part of that is probably due to the fact this is a 90-degree street curve and not one with a typical radius you would see where you'd have along maybe a cul-de-sac or an elbow in a street where you'd have some more street frontage there. So that one's considered a tandem lot as well. The townhouses, in neighborhood conservation, a 3-family unit, triplex, 3-family townhouse, however you want to call it, 3 units that are attached are a conditional use, so that's the second part of the conditional use request. So this is 1, 2, 3 units right here. Those would have common walls with a look somewhat like this. So there's the common wall, 1, 2, 3 units, then you'll have this green space here, and you'll jump up to these 3 units. So there's 2 sets of 3-unit buildings, so 3 triplexes or townhouses, however you want to call them, being proposed. So that's the 2 points of the conditional use that is in front of you. Andrew, I think, set this up quite well for discussion, review, and motions on the conditional use. If you look at the recommendations, you have a recommendation number 1 on tandem lots. So you can make a finding on that and vote on that separately, and then recommended motion number 2 on the townhouses. So you can discuss those, make recommendations, changes, approvals, denials, however you see fit. But those have been split up for you to be able to discuss those in that manner. Jumping back over to the preliminary plat, the overall density is going to be just slightly less than 4 units per acre. That's with all the townhomes and the single-family homes, whether they're tandem lot or regular. That's the overall density of 3.95. All the right-of-way, as I stated, had been dedicated along Mission Boulevard, and those improvements were completed. And really due to the extent of those improvements, if you remember the original project, I think was 295 units. It was a much denser, intenser development proposal, and so their street improvements were really based on that impact on public infrastructure at that time. Those are complete, and now they're coming back with a much less dense subdivision.
Mr. Garner, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, Mr. Foster. So you say Andrew sitting
I
there.
know, it's all right.
It sounds like you're getting into the preliminary plat part of this. Do we want to go ahead and listen to both of these at the same time?
I think so, just to give, it's kind of the overview, because the conditional use is really a few lots within the overall subdivision.
Okay, all right. We'll look at them both at the same time then.
And so on the street improvements, because all those improvements were done, really what's remaining is along Greenview, would just be this widening portion here that they've shown on their plans. That would be bringing that into compliance with our master street plan, curb gutter, sidewalks, the widening, to bring that into compliance. That's really the only remaining street improvements, obviously besides the number of improvements they have to make internal to the site to finish out this project. A lot of this really dates back to what has been constructed. There's a number of street variances or street design variances because these streets are already in. They're not going to go back in and reconstruct these and take out these, the reverse curves that we've talked about, where you're supposed to have a 150-foot separation between reverse curves, or where you've got these sharper intersections here. The grades on these streets are very steep, and so you'll see a number of planning commission variances under item number 2, but the majority of those are existing or a continuation of street sections to finish out this development. And really those are dating back to the original approval, and they're just carrying those variances forward through this preliminary plat as well. So on the conditional use, staff is recommending approval of the tandem lots as proposed by the applicant, and the 6 total units proposed in a townhouse format with the elevations provided by the applicant. There's 2 findings or 2 recommendations there for the planning commission to make on the conditional use. As far as the preliminary plat, there are 2 very lengthy findings for the planning commission. One is on street improvements. Again, it would be completing the interior streets along Mission Boulevard as construction of a 12-foot trail section sidewalk along Mission Boulevard. Completion of widening of Greenview Drive, that's 14 feet from center line, curb gutter, sidewalk at the Master Street Plan right-of-way. And then evaluation of a traffic signal at the intersection of Mission Boulevard and Lisa Lane will be determined with additional development. So again, as the rest of this project develops out, phase 2, we will go back and look at street improvements and see if things need to be done. Item 2, Planning Commission determination of variances. I'm going to run through these. Luckily, we have one of our engineers here to tackle the technical issues if you have questions about these. There's A is the return radius. The code requires 30 feet. This was, again, part of the original Ruskin Heights PCD that was approved and constructed. Staff has recommended approval of that. We're having to rehash all these variances again since the project was never completed. Different street sections. What you've seen in the preliminary plat packet is what's being proposed. Slightly different street sections than you'd see with the master street plan. Again, this is a continuation of what was constructed. Staff recommends in favor of B. Item C, retaining walls within the Hillside Overlay District behind the right-of-way, the separation behind the right-of-way. Again, approved as part of the original Ruskin Heights PCD, and something that staff is recommending in favor of again here. Vertical K values for street grade, again, due to the steep topography and continuation of the original project that was constructed. Item E is a waiver of the 150-foot horizontal curve radii. Again, part of the steep terrain and curvature of the streets to get up the hills. Staff is recommending approval of E. F is street grades greater than 4% within 100 feet of an intersection. Staff is recommending approval of those grades at the intersection. gutter sections that were constructed, these were stand-up designs. I believe with the continuation of the streets, they will meet our current code, but this is to recognize the existing curb and gutter sections constructed. That's item G, and then item H is the dead-end street turnaround, required by Fire Department Access Code, and that has been reviewed and recommended in favor of by the Fire Department and by staff, and that's item H. Of course, parks fees will be due in the amount of $60,720 prior to the final plat. The urban forester, Ken Easton, our urban forester, is here as well to answer questions about tree preservation, tree planting. That was a discussion at subdivision committee. I believe the committee members were asking about planting trees on private property. Typically, when we have mitigation trees, those go on public property where the city has the ability to get to those, to be able to care for those and enforce regulations on those. When you put them in private property, it gets a little bit more difficult for us. The property owner, developer has worked out some agreements, some documents that would be part of the subdivision covenants to allow or to maintain those trees within private property. So I think they're really trying to address the comments that the subdivision committee members had and try to get some more of those trees spread out through the development versus solely within the public right-of-way. So we feel confident that is going to work out as well. But Ken is here for questions if you have them. A few standard conditions beyond that. Thank you.
All right. Is the applicant present, please? Sir, if you will, step up and give us your name and anything that you might want to add that Jesse didn't cover.
My name is Lawrence Finn. I'm representing the developer.
Ron Driver, I'm the civil engineer with Ecological Design Group.
Basically want to thank staff for their due diligence in working through what was and what is a very complicated project. Both the history of Ruskin Heights on this project and the rezoning that exists there, as well as the Hillside Overlay District. Fairly confusing project, but I think what we have actually been able to achieve by reducing the density on the project fairly significantly is still a very walkable, neighborhood-friendly community. So appreciate staff's efforts in working with us over the last 6 months to get us to Planning Commission.
We'll assume that you're in agreement with all staff's recommendations then.
Yes, the only one item that I would actually like to bring up that may not have been mentioned was a covenant that we actually submitted in negotiation with the urban forester, and we may talk about that a little bit further about the off-site trees that are actually being recognized as an area that will be impacted by this development, but that tree canopy will actually be preserved and recognized in future development. That was a covenant that was submitted with our package following subdivision committee.
Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
All right, thank you, sir. Ken, would you please clarify what he was just speaking of? I'm not sure I caught him.
If you'll kind of scan over to the west there a little bit, that's good. You see the street that is in the center of the drawing there. Okay, where the cursor is, that's the edge of this particular project. Everything beyond that is phase 2 or later phase. This project is going to impact quite a bit of canopy right on the north side of that of the street that has been assessed with this project. It's off-site mitigation, so it's automatically goes for mitigation on-site. And what the applicant is proposing, since that will be a later phase that's developed, they're proposing that that off-site mitigation be deferred until that parcel is developed.
Isn't that pretty standard practice?
No, usually if it's affected by this project, then it also mitigates within this project as well.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Which I'm sure we can get into this more in a few minutes. And we will, okay? Let's give the public a chance or whatever, subdivision committee as well. But yeah, I'm gonna have some more questions for you about it. Subdivision committee, Mr. Chair of the subdivision committee. Yes, you are. I think you are. Nope, you are. You're the man.
I think obviously the trees were a big, question mark on our end, and we had some questions about that, and I'm curious what else they've submitted potentially on that, and we will talk about that, but, I guess they satisfied engineering with their curb design, obviously, and the street improvements with that, yep, so,
Got good nods, that's good.
yeah, that's good. I think overall, there were several comments from residents, asking about some of the previous agreements that were made on this property and how they were gonna be affected within this. I'm sure we'll talk about that some more tonight too, but, I don't know, what else do you remember, I guess?
I think there was a question about, a detention pond and the,
Amphitheater.
well, no, a smaller one that was, sort of to the south, in that in-between area. Glenn, do you remember what we're talking about with that?
Yeah, I believe it was a discussion point in this area.
That's right. Did anything happen with that?
No, sir, there was no change in design. I believe it was just discussion from, adjacent property owners about the trees and items, the impact of making that a detention facility. There was no redesign that I reviewed.
Okay. We'll see what comes up from the, public with that one.
Okay. And what I remember, about that meeting, we'll try to head off some of the concerns before they ever get started tonight. And that is, any of the covenants that were made with the Ruskin Heights project run with the land, and therefore these, I don't think any of this changes that. Not Ruskin Heights, actually the one we just approved, the revamp of Ruskin Heights, I think, last year, I believe.
The bill of assurance.
Yeah, the bill of assurance.
As long as the rezoning is not changed, then that
Right.
bill of assurance is viable.
Right, and we're not changing any zoning with this, and so the bill of assurance that was given, I guess, last year remains intact, in force, whatever, so. And then, so that was one issue I remember. And then the other issue was, concern about an amphitheater and what have you, and so I think we got that clarified. They're going to use this as a passive park. When it's not wet, they can play volleyball, softball, whatever they want to do in it. But it's not being, suggested that it become an amphitheater, right? Okay, so I think that was another concern. Anything else?
Well, I think it wasn't really a volleyball park so much like
Whatever.
you could inhabit it.
Yeah,
as a park.
inhabitable when it wasn't soaking
Right.
wet. Right, okay. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and open up for public comment. If there's any member of the audience that'd like to step up and speak to this item. Okay. If you will, step up and give us your name and address, and if you will, as brief and concise as you possibly can.
Thank you. My name's Joanne Kavami. I live at 1982 Greenview, and we are not directly impacted by this phase. We haven't seen a plan for the whole development, so we don't know. We actually live in the upper part abutting the forested area. And I had a couple questions that I was concerned that this plan will go forward without having us be able to see the plan for the whole development. When earlier plans went forward, and they set like the retention ponds because the amount of water coming off the hill, especially if any of the trees are removed, you have massive amounts of water coming off there. You need to know how much of that surface area is going to be impermeable before you start talking about retention ponds and ways to mitigate water, which means that you need to know what's going to happen on the whole site before. You can't do piecemeal from the bottom up because that water's all going to be running downhill. And as I'm sure anyone who's tried to go down Mission during storms, the amount of water that comes off that is phenomenal. So I would ask that you see the whole plan and be able to figure the percentage of impermeable surfaces so we can make sure that these detention ponds can actually hold the amount of water necessary to protect people on the other side of Mission, let alone everybody else on there. I had a question. I looked at the tree plan, the tree preservation plan that was, I don't know, it's one of those. Anyway, I was looking at that and I was wondering, is that the tree plan from the Ruskin Heights property and it's just been used again, or has the urban forester looked at it? Because it seems like there's an awful lot too few trees that are considered significant in that area. I feel that's pretty sensitive. Another area is we were promised, and as you said with the Ruskin Heights, that those agreements, I guess they're okay, but we were told by Mayor Cootie in no uncertain terms that if there was a road going out to Greenview, there would be a boulevard put in with a right turn only towards Mission, because otherwise Viewpoint's going to turn into just a cut through, because nobody can get out on Mission because the traffic is so bad. The other thing I would like to respectfully suggest is if trees have to be taken out, especially on the flatter areas, I know where businesses are, I would hope that that would mean that they were going to protect those on the slopes, because if those trees aren't protected on the slopes, we're going to have some severe erosion issues. Even when SWEPCO cuts trees down, our properties flood for a couple of years afterwards because the moisture is no longer held in those trees. And if there's a lot of building in that forest, you're not only going to flood all of us who have houses there, you're going to flood the houses you've already built down the hill. I would recommend, and of course I'm no one to recommend, but I would kindly recommend that you, if the developer wants to develop somewhere else, give them credit for saving trees and save them on that hill so we protect that slope from erosion. I mean, that would be a great way. Give them credit for trees somewhere else by keeping more than they have to up there, because it's going to be very important to people who live there and also people who may live there in the future. And also in the hill slope ordinance, most of the area, a lot of the areas, well, part of it is hill slope ordinance. And I thought in the hill slope ordinance that you have to map out any tree that has a diameter over 3 inches. And I noticed the ones that are on the map are all over 12. And I could be wrong on that. I don't know about that. The other question I had is looking at the, and I'm sorry to keep going, but, and looking at the proposal, where are these cars going to park? Is this all on-street parking, or do they have parking lots? Because these roads are exceptionally narrow, and if people don't have a place to park their 2.2 or 4 cars or whatever, there's no way any emergency vehicle will ever get up and down those streets. That's just not going to happen. And, sorry. Okay. I'll sit down. Thank you.
Ma'am, what was your name again?
Joanne Kavami.
Oh, boy. I don't know if I can spell that.
Kvamme. Thank you. And I would appreciate, the neighbors, we're not horrible, but we really do want to protect it so for our livelihoods so we don't go sailing down onto Mission like everyone else. Oh, one other thing is the traffic is really bad now. And I realize this is not as dense as some of the other proposals have been, but still, where are we going to put all these cars? Just something to think about. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak to this item?
Fred Sherman, 2134 East Camelot Place. My home is virtually surrounded by this project. I'm speaking for myself, but I first want to say that I really am appreciative of the improvements that have been made. I noticed the fire truck accessibility was in fact taken care of. And this is an all-residential community, as I understand at this point, with the exception of the edge of Mission Boulevard. And I do have a question also regarding the accessibility of this development and the traffic control. It's difficult for us to get out in the morning. I really take my life in my own hands getting out of Park Place, and I really would like to see some sort of traffic control, whether it's one traffic light or possibly two. And again, I want to remind you that I'm speaking for myself. I want to commend staff for the changes that they've made, and hopefully none of the agreements that were made for Ruskin Heights will be carried forward. As I understand, this is mostly a hillside ordinance property. Am I incorrect in any of those assumptions?
Yeah, part of, I think most all this property's in the hillside, isn't it? HHOD? Portion of it?
There's,
Yes, sir.
no, the entire property is not in the hillside. There is a map provided by the applicant that outlines that. Not sure what best page. Tree canopy plan L0.3 portions in and out of it. That's a little challenging for the applicant. We discussed that during the iterations to get to this point. So I don't know if that identifies it well, but areas here, part of it is outside the canopy. You can see this dashed line, that is the canopy, the hillside overlay, so this commercial area will be outside of it. And this area on top of the hill is in it, even though it's already been disturbed and there's not many trees, but this area is not in it. So there is some in and some out.
The vast majority, though, is in, is that correct? In the residential areas?
Larger percent, yes.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else like to speak to this item?
I'm Don Connor, 1686 East Shadow Ridge. City planning keeps talking about the density here, that it's less dense, but we don't have the whole plan. You know, they don't show us what phase 2, 3, or however many phases they have, so we don't really know whether this is any less dense than what was proposed before, and the myriad of different changes we've gone through on this project. Another thing is when you're comparing that sort of thing, what happened to the trees that were supposed to have been mitigated for Ruskin Heights when they took away the trees that were there? They didn't ever replant their mitigation trees. So, what happened to those trees? A lot of those sort of things were never addressed. There was never anything addressed about the bond, the Fayetteville water bond that they sold for this property. Is it part of this deal, or is it paid back, or does anybody know anything about it? Those sort of concerns, and we're definitely concerned about having a no left turn up Greenview to keep additional traffic from coming up the hill. We've got enough getting out ourselves, and with the additional traffic that they're offering, even from this phase, you're looking at 225 cars or so, 2 trips a day at the minimum. So that's a lot more cars dumped out on the mission. And then there's the school district issue of the schools are full in our area since it's root school district, and so where are they going to put extra kids? We don't know anything about what their plans are on the houses themselves. Are these going to be 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 5-bedroom? What are they going to stack on there so we can get an idea of what to expect there. You know, if they're putting 4 and 5 bedroom houses, obviously they're gonna have more than 4 or 5 cars involved in each house, so, you know, where's the multiplication factor on that? Did they conduct a new traffic study, since traffic has increased pretty dramatically over the last couple of years since the last traffic study when it was the Ruskin Heights proposal? And I don't know, there's just such a myriad of things that are involved in this. We really would like to know more about what the rest of the plan is. Are they going to put apartments up front? Are they gonna put strictly commercial? Are they gonna put a live works? And then what's gonna happen on the RSF4 that's on the back? Are they going to keep that as strictly an RSF4? Are they gonna come back and ask for a different variance or new zoning or something like that? So, you know, I'd like to see some of those concerns addressed. Thank you.
Sir. Anybody else like to speak to this item?
The only thing I didn't
Ma'am,
know about...
we need your
Oh,
name.
I'm sorry. My name is John L. Booth.
Ma'am?
John L. Booth, like John L. Hunt with no H. Jonelle. My question is, how tall? Because I have a pool in my backyard, and since they've built it up so much with bringing in truckloads and truckloads of dirt, and now I don't even know if they're going to abide by the hillside ordinance behind my house or not. So if they build a 3 or 4 story home or 3-story home behind my house, are they gonna be looking directly into my backyard and my pool? And that's a concern. I'd like to know how tall, how many stories this project is gonna be. Have I missed that?
Can you point to that map up there and kind of tell us where your house is, ma'am?
It's on Camelot,
One.
kind of in the middle of Camelot, it backs up to the property, so.
Okay.
Got a red button on there? We can help you out, yeah.
Fred, do you know about where it is?
That it right there?
So is that gonna be considered hillside or not? I guess it's right there on the edge.
This is hillside.
Ma'am? Ma'am?
So
Okay, if you will.
the question is that considered hillside? Because I'm kind of in the middle of it, of Camelot Place. Kind of more towards the back corner of where, Ruskin was. My fence is lined up there, so it's kind of on the edge of whether it's gonna be a hillside or not, I guess.
Is that it?
Yep.
Thank
That's it, and I'm also concerned about the drainage because a lot of the houses over there already flood, so we need to make sure we keep that retention pond up there. I know it's been a great benefit.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Cynthia Parker. I live at 1680 East Shadow Ridge Drive, and I share about 200 feet with this project. And I'm very happy about the 4 families per acre density on this. And I'm hoping every consideration will be given to the trees and all of that. But I just wanted to say that I'm happy with the density on this project rather than what we were given before. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else?
I'm James Sledge. I live at 1984 North Greenview Drive. I think it's pretty obvious that there's some serious concerns regarding drainage and tree removal, et cetera. I was wondering if anybody had an exact square footage of the second retention pond that is to be built down just below my property, which is where a new road is planned to be put in Phase 2. But there's kind of a weird line there. I wasn't quite sure, and I couldn't quite make out everything that was being said earlier, so if it's already been answered, I apologize. Another thing I wanted to mention is what exactly, and I'm sorry I couldn't understand you, Mr. Fulcher, with the tandem lots, what exactly happens with those tandem lots? Do they just sit there undeveloped, or will there be like drives built to those tandem lots? Additionally, you guys mentioned that you had plans, or there were plans in the works to expand Greenview Drive, which is by the old Dillons, the current Eureka Pizza, and that would be for Street A, which is proposed for Phase 2. But it looks like it's beginning in Phase 1. I was wondering if you guys could just, if we could get some clarity on that, and exactly which way that road's going to dump out towards Mission or towards the rest of the established neighborhood. And whatever you guys can do to preserve as much of the tree canopy as you can would certainly be appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
This is intimidating. My name's Gail O'Donnell. I live at 1960 North Greenview Drive. And I've been involved in the two previous development project proposals and concerns. This time, we don't know what's going to abut our property, so once again, we would really like to see what the plans are for the total property, including what's going to be up at the top of the Mission property, which would be behind our home. We have sewer problems, we have drainage problems, we do not have city curbs on our street, we do not have proper gutters that take the water from the streets on Greenview and above on Shadow Ridge. Almost all of the homes of my neighbors I talked to have had ramjack or foundation people coming to shore up the homes that possibly were not built properly back in the 70s. We assume that the homes built on this property will be high-quality homes and not something that is going to after a few years, turn into rental property. We assume that these homes are going to be properly piered, and I kind of heard the word retaining wall earlier because it was very difficult to hear what anybody was saying earlier when you were describing the whole project. We would want to know that those retaining walls are well done, because there are plenty of retaining walls around Fayetteville and on the hill on Sequoia that are not well done. And, if this is a development project in which the developer says, okay, here's what you're going to do, and then he leaves town and he's not around, it's not going to be done. We don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that unless it's truly overseen, it's going to be done well. So I'm looking at also the aesthetics of, having homes that look like they're forever, and that people will want to live there forever, have it their home for the rest of their life, and not start deteriorating immediately like we see in some other developments throughout Fayetteville. So those are some things that we've talked about as being concerns as well. The covenant that was mentioned, does that mean that the property owners on this development will have certain requirements? I'm not sure exactly, because we don't have a covenant of any type where in our neighborhood. Does it mean that they have to not park on the street, or does it mean that they have to keep their trees trimmed? I don't know what that means, a covenant. We've heard a lot about water effects as it comes down the hill onto people below it, but if you cut out a piece of earth off a hill, it's going to affect what's above it. because that clay of this Fayetteville Hill is forever moving. So that, that's something that any Fayetteville native like myself knows and has heard for generations. And it's true. So please have these people, these developers, take particular care to understand the uniqueness of that earth. Otherwise, I hope you'll listen to all of us. And we are glad. We know that property is going to be developed. That's just fine. That's going to happen, and, we're growing. We just want it to be extremely responsibly and done of a quality that means it's here to stay. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Latrice Sherman. I live at 2134 Camelot Place in Park Place Division. I can sort of speak for all of us that live in Park Place because right now my property is going to be affected on the north and the west side, and part of it will be in Phase 1, part of it will be in Phase 2, and we're concerned with what's going to happen with both phases. I know other people have mentioned things that they're concerned about. I, too, am concerned about the parking. I'm concerned about when Phase 2 is going to begin, and kind of give us an idea of the plans there. And I was very concerned when I heard about the passive park. We people that live in Park Place don't want, we're concerned about our privacy. We don't want a ballpark. I wouldn't want a ballpark right behind my home because of the noise level. I'm concerned about the stories of the houses, like one of the other ladies mentioned. I'm concerned about the level of the dirt because so much dirt was brought in with the Ruskin House development. If that's going to be leveled out to the north of my property, there is an extreme amount of dirt that wasn't there before. I'm concerned about the geological stand of the land to the west of my home, because when something comes in and something is moved, things are the trucks have dug up dirt, the watershed is going to be compromised. We already have the entire level of the Park Place that faces the west. We've had to go in and work on the foundation of our houses. We've already put $10,000 into the foundation of our house just because of the shift of the land. And when all of that dirt is moved and the watershed is disturbed, what's that going to do to our property too? And again, I appreciate these developers not making the property as dense as the others, but we're just trying to ask respectfully that they do respect our privacy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Ron Burton. I live on Camelot backing up to the project. I grew up in Fayetteville, had been away until 2010, moved back, and we've lived there and enjoyed the subdivision, enjoyed the area a great deal. Just two or three observations I have. One is I've never seen a piece of property so ill-suited to putting a subdivision on that has had so much money thrown at it. People have put tremendous amounts of money into buying it and then changing hills. But what I have not seen is anything that looks like the streets and the layout, either in this plan or in the previous put on that is there, that is, the streets are there. That doesn't look to me anything like something that is going to look good or that will last or that will impress anybody. If you walk into an area that somebody's put in a new subdivision or a new proposed subdivision, and if it doesn't look impressive, it will never be impressive. If you look at it and you say, boy, I don't know what they're going to do with those streets or that drainage, it'll never happen. And if it doesn't happen, then it never goes up, it always just sits, or it gradually goes down. So I encourage this body, and I encourage the developers, to do something intelligent with it. If there's anything talk about commercial, as there was previously, that was the biggest pipe dream I ever saw. Now, that isn't these folks' problem, but I understand they're still talking about something commercial in it. The people who live there don't want anything commercial there. Nobody wants anything commercial there, and if there's anything commercial there, nobody will go there. So I simply request that in looking into this project, that you figure out what's it for. This is a neighborhood that people want permanent residences there, that the homeowners will be the occupants, and that they'll take care of it and they'll keep it up, and the neighborhood will look good like most all of Fayetteville does. And something that varies from that, I encourage you to discourage that in any way that you can. I encourage the developers to discourage it in their own mind in any way they can, because it won't work. They will never make any money out of it, and whatever is built there won't fly. That was my biggest concern with the last go-around, is if you have all this commercial stuff in there and it fails, you have a commercial building empty, it's empty. And it is occupied, and then it's empty. And it looks like the Dickens. So just whatever you can do to encourage a family neighborhood with owner-occupied properties, and that has enough property to support it. If I were to guess, I would guess that if the best use for the thing is for about 5 homes. But you know, what do I know? I didn't have the money to buy it to begin with, so that's my opinion. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Pretty sure we went through the entire audience, but there's not. Okay. With that, we're gonna bring it back to the commission. Okay. I've got a lot of notes. But I think I can sum most of them up in just a few, things. Let's start with you, Ken. The tree mitigation plan that you looked at, okay, first question is it a new plan, is it the old plan? And whichever it is, did it consider the trees from the former project and the mitigation requirements of the former plan? In other words, the rows have gone in, were those trees mitigated for? Do they still need to be mitigated for? Is that included in this, what have you?
To answer the first part, it's not the inventory from the original Ruskin Heights development. A new inventory was prepared for this project. It's actually developed broken down into 3 canopy areas, and one of the canopies is actually what has grown up since Ruskin Heights was in the forefront. So yes, it is a new inventory. As far as the mitigation requirements for Ruskin Heights, unfortunately, that's a question I cannot answer at this time. I did not realize that there were previous mitigation requirements that were assessed with that original development. I was not in this position at that time, and I only watched the development from the background, but I did not think that there were that many trees there that were originally removed, but I guess I am wrong about that, so I'm going to have to investigate that myself.
Okay. Do you know when the streets were constructed, has it been 5 years? It has been 5 years? Mm-hmm. Okay, so...
It has.
Okay, so is that correct then?
Correct.
That's a period.
Okay, so...
5-year period would be that other project has expired and
okay.
all other aspects are gone.
All right, so I'd be safe to say that per our code, since it has been 5 years since that project went south, so to speak, whatever happened then, it's not in our purvey today then.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have that 5-year period for
prior tree removal.
All right, so therefore, you don't have to do any more investigation, Ken. All right, thanks. Okay, so you're satisfied with the plan that you have, that's been thoroughly scrutinized and all that, right? Okay.
In detail.
Okay, thank you. Same question for you, except we're gonna talk about water instead of trees.
Yes, sir.
You looked at the development plan, and of course, we're looking at this part of the project tonight, not any future part of the project. And once the future parts of this project come through, you'll look at it again, right?
Those statements are correct. However, the engineer did design these ponds that were shown on the grading plan for the drainage basin that this property includes for future development for the density based on zoning.
Okay.
So we have looked at it. We'll look at it when it comes again for the preliminary plat and verify that nothing's changed from their assumptions. But we have looked at it for that purpose. Different from the urban forester, I did ask the applicant to establish the drainage patterns prior to the initial development, prior to Ruskin Heights land disturbance, and that was one of the reasons that they went back. We held back to make sure that these improvements was not negatively impacting the neighbors. So we didn't start with whatever Ruskin Heights did. They went back prior to that for their drainage patterns. So we've gone and they have increased some detention from what they had originally designed, and we can go into that in detail if you'd like, but they have addressed each property, each discharge to meet pre-development prior to land disturbance, prior to Ruskin Heights.
Okay, so there's, and another thing I want to ask you about in a second. So there's 3 statements I'll make, and you tell me if any one of them are wrong. So you fully investigated the drainage, and you feel like it is at least adequate, especially since the density has come down. So that's an accurate statement.
Yes.
And then that drainage has been also calculated for the current zoning and density of future phases as it is today.
Yes.
So if they came in and made any significant changes to that zoning or density or what have you, they would have to go through all this again. The notification,
Yes,
et cetera.
when they came with another phase or change, we'd reevaluate it and make sure their assumptions right now are accurate.
Okay. So you have looked at the full engineering?
Yes, sir. This project as a whole, as the applicant indicated, I'm not sure if it was fully 6 months, but it was a duration of numerous iterations, working with the applicant for the drainage and street design and variety of issues to make this project viable, given the conditions they were starting with. So we spent a lot of time on it.
All right, and people have talked about, another one of the main concerns was traffic, lots and lots and lots of traffic. In the former Ruskin Heights project, I believe that, and you can add to this or whatever, but I think they had to put a turn lane along Mission Boulevard.
Correct.
There were some other improvements. Do you want to elaborate on that?
The improvements that were mainly along Mission is what was looked at with the initial infrastructure of this preliminary plat that was never completed. And the density was, how do I say this? We don't know what they're proposing as later phases. However, what we have on the same footprint of soil for this first phase, they're looking at a lot less dense properties. They were looking at multi-stories, 4- or 5-story buildings, apartments, and density much greater than this. So square footage from impact on phase 1 of what they're looking at compared to phase 1, the same footprint of this previous development, significantly reduced the traffic.
Okay, good. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you about, Glenn, is retaining walls. Somebody mentioned those.
Yes, sir.
Typically retaining walls that are, I think they're over 42 inches.
4 foot
4 feet.
or taller requires a grading permit structurally designed by an engineer of record, inspected and certified before we sign off.
Okay.
So, and also there'll be reviews for the homes specifically designated in HHOD criteria. So we'll be looking at those individually as they come in down the road for the residential design or the grading for the residential homes.
All right. Thank you very much. And last thing, Mr. Folger, folks have shown concern about height of buildings or what have you. In this particular zoning, I know we don't have any limitation on number of stories, but we do have a limitation on height. What is that, please?
45 feet.
45 feet. So the answer to that question is a home can be built in your backyard up to 45 feet tall. So if that gets, puts somebody in a position of seeing over your fence, that's what it does. As far as, somebody brought up about bonds on the water for the project or whatever, that, I don't think that's in our purvey. That's not something that we're considering here. And then finally, somebody asked if the developer would do things intelligent. Unfortunately, we can't require any developer to be intelligent, so. All right, so I'm gonna bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chester.
I suspect that I am the most familiar person with this project in the entire room. Since I wrote the development code and I surveyed most of it personally. I have a few quick questions. Mr. Newman, first question that was mentioned by the public that I'd love for you to address, and I'm going to tell you what I recall, and then you tell me if I'm right or wrong. I believe that since this is a state highway, the only way to put a light there is if a certain traffic, or what's it called, I can't remember, warrant is met. And the only way for that warrant to be met would actually be higher density on this project than RSF4. Am I correct about that recollection?
Your recollection is correct, as being that is a state route, and it would require warrants to be met per the state criteria. What density that would require, I do not know. Based on traffic volume on Mission, the turning movements that would be occurring at these locations to justify the impedance of the traffic on Mission to allow those turns. So it would require a traffic study and have to be presented to the state for that to be considered.
Okay.
But we would concur that the density would not, we would not expect it would warrant it with this phase.
If I recall correctly, I think the only way to get a light was for it to be close to the density that it was originally designed for. So I'm not sure that there's any way to put a light in there because of state requirements. So it's not a city, the city doesn't really get to make a decision on that. That's what I'm trying to clarify, right?
We would make a recommendation based off a traffic study if we got to that level. The state, generally, anything in the city limits, would ask our input before they would place a signal without the city's concurrence.
Okay, but they make the final decision,
Yes,
ultimately.
they would choose yes or no.
Okay. Since right now we're discussing, I'm going to go to the CUP, since that's what we're really kind of discussing. One is, can you pull up the section with the tandem lots, please? I know that we generally discourage tandem lots. But I wanted to say something about these, and Mr. Poultry, correct me if I'm incorrect, if I'm wrong. These are not your run-of-the-mill tandem lots. Normally, when we think of a tandem lot, we would call it a flag lot, where one lot is sort of directly behind another one, and there's an access going to the back. That's what I think of. These are unusual in that it looks like there's an extensive network of alleys in this neighborhood, and it looks like these lots are just going to front onto the alleys. Have I got that correct?
Some of them will front onto a common green.
Not front, but, sorry, be accessed
yes,
by alleys, which are the same alleys that were there in the past, in most cases. There's a couple of new ones, I think.
Yeah, there are alleys that haven't been constructed. You can see the gray here is giving access to some of these lots. This is a tandem lot here. That's an existing public street. And then there's four right there. And so
Okay.
This is the new alley access. These are getting access off of that existing public street. So it's a combination of new and old.
Okay, so the unusual part about these tandem lots is they actually all have vehicular access. That's, instead of fronting onto a, quote, public street, they're fronting onto, I believe those are public alleys, or are they private alleys? Onto a public alley.
Yes, public alleys.
Okay. So that's an interesting change that we sure hadn't thought of, and I think I actually kind of like what they did there. I heard something about number of bedrooms mentioned. We can't consider that, can we?
No, we cannot consider the number of bedrooms.
In a zoning? Okay. Can we require the developer to show what's in future phases when we're considering current phases? Is that a thing we can do?
They're subject to the zoning requirements that already exist on the property, so they're developing under neighborhood conservation and some RSF4 regulations, so they have to meet those density requirements, the use units. That's part of what the conditional use is that you're looking at 2 use units that aren't allowed by right, so that's something that is being discussed. But essentially, they're allowed to do single-family homes of any style, size, rental, owner-occupied, 2-bedroom, 4-bedroom. That's the developer's decision.
Okay. And that's actually somewhat different than the PZD, which was actually more strict.
The PZD showed architectural styling, but it didn't limit the number of bedrooms, whether they're owner-occupied or rentals or anything like that. It just gave you a greater insight into the project.
Okay. In the original PZD, if I recall correctly, engineered foundations were required. Does that run with this new project, or is it different? I heard several neighbors mention problems with clay and things. Is that something that's still required, or is that off the table? That's still required with the old?
In HHOD, engineering is going to be reviewing grading plans, engineered foundations.
Only in the HHOD would engineered foundations be required. So
But that's the part of main concern.
That is not the entire development. It
Right.
would just be some of it, yes, sir.
Okay. And since I'm with engineering, Mr. Newman, the streets were originally designed, several of them, for on-street parking that still allowed for emergency vehicle access. Do you expect them to still be able to be parked in similar ways? Several people asked about parking. I know that's often a concern, but I thought, on-street was a design feature of this project originally.
There's a variety of street sections here, and I don't know, Jesse, the best one, if there's a site plan that would or wouldn't show. However, just to elaborate on there, the fire code requires a minimum of 20-foot clear access on all streets as being enforced with these developments. Years ago, it was not as strictly enforced with development, so I'm not sure exactly how Ruskin allowed all the, everything that was going on at that point. But we do have the minimum 20-foot clear. There are some street sections and parking on one side. I believe there's one road that still allows parking on both sides, but we do have the clear section. The applicant performed an auto turn with fire access apparatus based on the parking locations and the additional paving or grass paving, things such as that you see a little darker around the existing alleys and some of the unique 90-degree turns and such. So we went through the process with the applicant and the fire department to ensure that we were able to access this site as necessary that we'd expect here for safety.
I think some of those 90 degrees are rollover curbs, right?
Yes, sir. The overall site plan, I believe, the hard 90 that you were seeing in the lower right-hand corner does have will have rollover curb and additional paving. The alleys are wider in certain areas to make sure those turns are made.
Okay. Let's see. One final comment, just generally. I know that there is some commercial down at the bottom of the site. The original plan had live work and some, let's call it, inter-neighborhood commercial. I would disagree with one member of the public who said that you can't have commercial in a residential neighborhood. I think there are lots of great neighborhoods that are residential that have commercial built into them. My only reservation about this project is actually that I wish it was more dense, because I feel like this is one of the few green fields left in the city. It's one of our few opportunities to try to really meet the goals of City Plan 2030 and build an sort of an integrated neighborhood that begins to approach some urban density numbers that I think City Plan 2030 calls for. But the developer has chosen not to do that. They're at merely an RSF4 zoning density, and I'm not their marketer, so they get to decide that stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to other people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
I have a question.
question about, for staff, about the sidewalk that's gonna be built.
Could you speak up, please?
I'm sorry.
Just build it down there.
I have a question for staff about the sidewalk that's going to be built. I was looking at Jesse, so I was like, just tell me. So there's gonna be sidewalk built along Mission. Is it gonna be connecting with the sidewalk that, is already in front of, let's see, there's a sidewalk in front of Park Place. Is it gonna connect there?
I can expand to that. The Ruskin Heights project, I believe, connected the sidewalk further down as part of the initial infrastructure. The request is to make this a wider trail corridor in this section, so they're adding to the width of this location. So that would be, since this lot is a detention lot, the additional width would be part of the infrastructure along with this sidewalk that is shown here. So there's some of these sidewalks that would be built with the infrastructure, and typically the ones that can be constructed at a later date with the vertical construction, then that would come along later in other areas on site.
Okay, so you said, okay, so there's gonna be just that little bit there, and then the interior, okay. That answers my question.
Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify, in the subdivision committee meeting, we talked about the detention pond and what its use was for, and there's been a lot of confusion about that. It's a detention pond, primarily, and the developer wants to make it also be habitable in a very passive way where, you know, people could walk around inside of it or on it. Maybe there might be benches or something like that. But this is not a place for a ball field. It's not a place for concerts. It's not a place for anything like that. It's simply slightly more than a pond. So it just, and if you wanted to add anything to that, I'd be happy to hear that. Or if you want to just nod and say, yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The detention pond really, its engineering is to handle sizable 100-year storm event. In the time that we don't receive a 100-year storm event, it will actually be used as a passive park. There'll be boardwalks to be able to walk around it. There'll be tiered walls that will be part of it, so that the neighbors can actually use this as a parkland, and a passive parkland. So it will also complement the commercial district that's next to it, that if there was a sandwich shop, if you will, they could take it over to the park and enjoy the views and the passive nature of a pond with a park.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I'm a man looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. But however, before we go there, one moment. You had said earlier in your that we needed to vote on some things separately. So remind us again what those were so we can do this appropriately.
Yes, the first item you have for a motion would be the conditional use to allow the two uses, the tandem lots and the townhouses. And there is a recommended motion number 1 on the tandem lots. So you're voting on the tandem lot approval as item 1, and then recommended motion number 2 is on the townhouses. So Andrew just broke the two different conditional uses into two different motions.
Okay. So that's what I'm looking for a motion on, is on the conditional use permit only.
Yeah. But I think there are two motions for the conditional use permit. Am I reading that right, Mr. Fulcher?
Yes, I'm sure if you felt comfortable, you could combine that into two things, but it was, since there's two completely different uses, it was easier for us to break them apart.
Okay, and I haven't heard any discussion of the townhouses at all, so I'm gonna read that as if everybody's okay with that. Before I make a motion, I wanna make one other comment, given my earlier comments. Even though I wrote the development code for this 7 years ago, I think. I haven't had anything to do with this project since. I have met the developer, but I have no financial interest whatsoever in this project, so that's why I have not recused myself. I kind of felt like my unique knowledge would be useful in this case, but it doesn't impact me either way whether or not it passes, I suppose, except for my pride. So, given that, I'm going to move that we approve CUP 14-4699, finding in favor of the approval of the tandem lots and finding in favor of the townhouses. And let's see, are there other findings I have to find in favor or against, Jesse?
There's no specific findings.
Specific findings,
There's,
okay.
Conditions of approval.
And otherwise finding in favor of the other, how many conditions of approval have you got?
6 in total.
6 conditions of approval.
Second. Motion to approve by Commissioner Chester and second by Commissioner Autry. Mr. Fulcher.
Honchel?
Yes.
Cook?
Yes.
Winston?
Yes.
Bunch?
Yes.
Autry?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Chester?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. And now we're on to preliminary plat 14-4698.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Chester.
Given that we're okay with the CUPs, I'm going to move that we approve PPL 14-4698 with staff recommendations of approval, finding in favor of the street improvements mentioned in condition 1, finding in favor of the variance recommended in 2. Do I need to go through those point by point, Jesse?
No, sir.
And finding in favor of the other variances and conditions through number 11 mentioned.
Second.
Okay. The motion is approved by Commissioner Chester and a second by Commissioner Winston. Mr. Fulcher.
Honchel?
Yes.
Cook?
Yes.
Winston?
Yes.
Bunch?
Yes.
Autry?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Chester?
Yes.
Motion carries.
You're done. You're free. Next. Okay. All right. Next item on the agenda is stand by 1 second here. Okay, next item on the agenda is, my goodness. Hey, folks. There you go. Thanks. Next item on the agenda is rezoning, my goodness, 14 to, there you go. Bye night. Okay, rezoning -144794, submitted by Specialized Group for property located at northeast corner of Treadwell Street and Duncan Avenue. Property is zoned RMF 40, residential multifamily 4 units per acre and contains approximately 1.54 acres. The request is to rezone the property to downtown general. Mr. Fulcher standing in for Mr. Garner.
Wayne, did you have an update on this?
Oh, I did. Sure, Jesse, I thought you had to.
No, I
Mr.
did not
Chair-
receive anything from the
Mr.
applicant.
Chair, if I may,
Wait a minute. Okay, how about you?
well, if you would, the applicant sent an email late in the afternoon that they would prefer to, and request to withdraw this item, or table this item, to a future date. Is that correct?
Withdraw or table? Which
Table it, pardon me, table it.
Okay.
Why don't we, since the representative's here, why didn't he express that himself, so we have that in the record?
Or herself.
That's it.
Either one,
You get
either one of you.
That's what you get for hiding back there in the back.
Good evening. Seth Mims, Specialized Real Estate Group, and we would request to table this rezoning item until probably the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, well, is there any need to read it and go through all that stuff and whatever?
You've already read the title, I think that's enough.
Okay, motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Winston.
I'll move to, table rezone 14-4794 until the next planning commission meeting.
second.
Okay, you guys working backwards this time, huh? All right, we have a motion to table by Commissioner Winston and a second by Commissioner Chester. Mr. Fulcher.
Honchel,
Yes.
Cook,
Yes.
Winston,
Yes.
Bunch,
Yes.
Autry,
Yes.
Hoskins,
Yes.
Chester,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay. I lost my good, wrong page, I got so many notes. All right, I think our last item is rezoning 14-4793, submitted by Specialized Group for property located at the southwest corner of North Steel Boulevard and West Joyce Boulevard, excuse me. The property is zoned C2 thoroughfare commercial and contains approximately 14.01 acres. The request is to rezone the property to C3 central commercial. Mr. Fulcher, or Mr. Thompson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property is, Jesse, can you pull up a aerial or something for us?
Absolutely.
The property is on the corner of Joyce and Steel Boulevard. It would be the northwest corner. Currently 2 lots and 14 acres. The property is currently C2, as is much of that area. The applicant is requesting, as you noted, C3 in this spot. Reason for that, as I understand it, is the applicant is interested in developing multifamily apartments and possibly some commercial on this site. C2 allows that only as a conditional use, does not allow it by right, and that's not a condition that suits the applicant or the property owner, as I understand it. We did have some public comment early on, and then again late this afternoon. One property owner to the west is Johnson, did come and review the request, had no comment. This afternoon I got a telephone call from Miss Carol Groves. She lives on Mary Drive. She did call to express opposition to the rezone. She said that, in her opinion, apartments would not be appropriate in that area and adjacent to her neighborhood. The property is in the urban center area designation, according to City Plan 2030. This area does call for development of traditional mixed-use centers. It would allow people to live, work, and shop in the same areas, and we haven't seen a lot of that there. It is appropriate, therefore, according to the City Plan 2030 Future Land Use Plan. The property is, as we noted, currently C2. This C3 zoning is similar in many respects. It does allow, as we noted, use unit 26 for multifamily development. It also would increase the allowable height from 75 to 84 feet. And neither of these are form-based districts. You probably will notice that. We usually or typically won't support a development or a rezone of this kind if it's not in a form-based zone. It's what we prefer to recommend to you all. However, there are a couple of issues on this site that do make it, in staff's opinion, appropriate. One would be extensive easement along the northern and eastern sections. There's particularly along the eastern section a 40-foot, I believe it's a water line easement. Water line right in the center of that. That's an extensive easement, quite wide. Along the north and the east, the topography is rather steep. It slopes down quite a bit. And staff opinion, this would make it unfeasible or impossible to develop traditional town form and bring a building to the street edge. It's just not appropriate in this site. And we believe that the introduction of residential use in this commercial corridor could begin to create a true mixed-use district that would be consistent with our traditional town form. Might also increase pedestrian activity and walkability in an area that's absolutely devoid of that at this time. the proposed zoning is justified at this time in order to develop this property with a specific use that the applicant has, and would not be able to achieve without a conditional use, and even then, that use would be limited to 50% of commercial development, so not suitable to their needs. For those reasons, staff does recommend that the Planning Commission forward this to the City Council with your approval. Thank you.
All right. Is the applicant present? You'll come up and give us your name and anything you might want to add.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. Seth Mims, Specialized Real Estate Group. Well, right here, we'd be talking about planning a very nice multi-housing community. We hope to have a little bit of mixed use therein, but it would mainly be multi-housing. We at Specialized believe in healthy buildings and connected communities, and with an emphasis on sustainability, and those values will certainly be employed with this project as well. The reason that we're asking for C3 instead of a form-based code, because this would be the first time that I've ever requested a zoning designation that was not a form-based code, and that's because we believe in urbanism. But as Quinn stated, in this particular instance, there are so many easements around the property that the build-to zone would be a moot point, and then also the sellers just absolutely refused to let me request a form-based code because they wanted to maintain the developability that they currently have on that property with the C2. You know, that property was originally intended for, say, big box uses like Academy Sports. So they want to maintain that ability to develop that way should my deal fall apart. So C3 is the exact same zoning, slightly higher height limit, just allows multifamily as a permitted use.
Sir?
I mean, you are aware, Seth, of course, that you'll have to get the permission of Johnson, City of Johnson also, because we are abutting them here.
Yes, sir. We're on the September agenda in Johnson.
We're required to get an approval from Johnson?
The city council, will, if they would choose to rezone, it'll have to be, it's not final until the adjoining city approves. And the same thing if Johnson wanted to rezone next to us, our city council would have to agree to that also.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
if I may. Within 1,000 feet of an adjacent municipality, there is a resolution of their city government required to enact that or to bring that rezoning into force. So they're not required to approve before you can, but in addition to.
Before it becomes effective, they have to approve.
Correct. Well, that's exactly.
Okay. All right, thanks. Anybody from the commissioner? Public? Yes, sir. Public. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Anybody from the public like to speak to this item? Seeing no public, bring it back to the commissioners.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Chester.
So question Quinn or Jesse, or city attorney. If they wanted to do a CUP, would that be would the same rule apply for Johnson?
CUP? No.
Okay.
It's a zoning.
Just curious.
agency.
So change of zoning, they're going to have to say yes. CUP, they wouldn't. Okay. All right. Other than that, do we not? C3 is technically a down zone, isn't it? Is that correct?
No.
Up zone.
That's an up zone?
You add,
I thought C1 was higher, I thought C1 was more intense than C2. Other way around.
And then C2 and then C3.
C3 is most intense. Okay. Is there other C3 around here?
Bellefonte Gardens is only C3 in the entire city, or Bellefonte
Okay.
Commercial District.
But effectively, basically, I totally see why the applicant's trying to do this. Basically, it's really the setback the easement problems that are what are causing you to say, yeah,
And
this
the
is okay.
multifamily.
Well,
and the use that they want to use it for.
I believe it's the conditional use introduces an extra level of risk that
No, I
they
understand
can't
that.
take, and that also, the seller won't budge on their end, so that they think this is the best avenue.
I understand that, but I'm saying the reason you think C3 is appropriate in this case, even though there's none anywhere else in the city, is because of these very exceptional easements that are unusual.
I do. I think it would be very difficult and probably not possible on a lot of this property to develop under a form-based code. We would be granting variances right automatically.
Okay. All right. Given that, anybody else can comment that they want. This seems fine to me, and I agree that more residential here. My wife and I were just eating at that Greek restaurant 3 days ago, and she was like, should we walk across the street to get ice cream or drive? And we ended up driving because there's basically no pedestrian traffic here. And the sidewalks are actually wide enough, and the intersections are designed for it, but it's still a little scary with no other pedestrians out here. So I would like to see more, and given that, I'm going to move that we forward RZN 14-4793 to the City Council with a recommendation for approval.
C3 is what you said, right?
I didn't say anything about, I'm just saying we forward this rezone.
Okay.
I'm not determining, they determine to what. I'm just saying I agree with it.
Second. I'm not sure I know where I am.
Motion and a second.
Yeah, I'm with you. Quick question, then I'm gonna get this thing past us. If this happened to fail in Johnson for them, could they come back for conditional use in C2 for multifamily? Could they do that? Is it offered in C2?
Quinn, is that a?
Conditional use.
Well, it would not have
You
been,
could say.
if it fails in Johnson, it will not be effective here, so they would have to go back to the C2, and at that point, then I think they could come back and ask for conditional use.
That's my question. In other words,
This doesn't foreclose that.
okay, so that is offered in C2 zoning as a conditional use, multifamily.
No, it is not.
Okay, that was my,
Excuse me.
that's my question.
Let me jump back over to it. No, it is not.
Only as an auxiliary?
The conditional use that Mr. Thompson was talking about is under the accessory residential use under chapter 164.
Right.
Which says you can do an accessory commercial
50%.
use in, 49%. So,
Right.
under C2, they're stuck at 49% residential, 51% commercial. That's not what they want to do. They want to do 90+% residential. So C3 is the only thing that they can agree to with the seller of the land, is C3.
So the use is available in a certain sense, but the use unit is not available as a conditional use, and I'm sorry I didn't make that clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, we have a motion to forward with a recommendation of approval by Commissioner Chester, and a second by whom?
Mr. Hodgson.
Commissioner Hansel, thank you. Mr. Fulcher?
Honchel? Yes. Cook?
Yes.
Winston?
Yes.
Bunch?
Yes.
Autry?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Chester?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, do we have subdivision coming up?
Always.
Yes, it's always around the corner.
It's always around the
Mr.
corner.
Chester.
Can you give us a date on that, please, and what team it is, please?
Yes, sir. I'm right on it.
Hey, we're not adjourned.
August 14th.
I'm sorry?
August 14th.
Which team, please?
So I don't know that there are any items.
I'll volunteer for that one.
Yes. It's August 14th.
He's gonna join me.
Team 1.
Who is
Ron,
that?
Blake, and Craig.
What's the matter?
I'm pretty sure there's nothing on
Something
there.
wrong about that. Okay.
There's check stubs or checks. Also, there's a commissioner training course in Little Rock. If you want to attend, please let us know. We'd be
It's not city sponsored.
It's not city sponsored, no, it's a Little Rock training, but we do cover travel and training for planning commission.
Yes.
If that's what you meant, then yes, we do.
Good. All right, with that, we're adjourned.